Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm hot foiling on vellum for a Happy New Year card. So let's get started. This is the Hero Arts Twinkling Stars hot foil plate, and I'm going to be hot foiling it onto some Hero Arts classic vellum layering paper. This is quite an opaque paper. It's quite thick for vellum, which is good because you can use it in lots of different ways. So I'm just cutting a piece of Spellbinders champagne foil down. This is quite a big plate, so I do need quite a big bit of the foil. I am cutting the side down, and then I also end up needing to cut a little bit off the bottom. Those little bits I cut off I do save because they're really helpful for sentiment strips. So I do need to just cut this down a little bit. I'm also using a bigger piece of vellum than I need to, just so that I've got space to wiggle it around a little bit. So I'm just placing those down, and then I'm going to hold everything down with some low tack tape. This is Spellbinders Best Ever Craft Tape. I find it really helpful to use when hot foiling. So I'm just holding everything down. This just makes sure that it doesn't shift or anything like that while I'm running it through my die cutting machine. I do find that if I don't stick anything down, that when I try and remove the platform from the base of the Glimmer hot foil system, I do end up shifting it around. So that's why I just like to hold everything in place, but that's just personal preference. Everyone's does seem to foil slightly differently. So I've placed it onto the platform here of the Glimmer hot foil system with the plate facing down, and then I've pressed the timer button. I did let the platform heat up while I was off camera, and then when the timer button stops flashing, it means that it's heated up enough to run it through your die cutting machine. However, when I was experimenting with vellum, I found that I did need to heat it up 2 cycles, and I did also need extra pressure as well. Because the vellum, although this is quite a thick vellum, it is thinner than cardstock, so I do need that extra pressure, and I felt like I needed the extra heat as well. So I'm just pressing the timer button again, letting it flash. Once it's finished heating up, then it goes solid green, and I can remove the platform from the base, and then this time I can run it through my die cutting machine. I am taking some printer paper, and I've just folded that in half so that I've got 2 layers of that, and then I've got the 2 shims that come with the system. And for me, with my die cutting machine, I found that this was enough pressure. So I'm just slowly running that through my Platinum 6 die cutting machine, and I did get a pretty good impression. There were a couple of little areas that I realised afterwards that hadn't foiled perfectly, but actually in my experiments that I did off camera, I did get really nice impression. So the downside of holding everything down is that I do need to remove this tape. I didn't really need to add as much on that I did. I could have just added a strip at the top and a strip at the bottom, but I think I was just being overcautious because the plate is quite large. So just being careful here, because obviously this plate is quite hot at this point, so I can use the tape as a handle to actually lift that off. So again, just being careful here and placing that on the silicone mat. And then I've got a really beautiful piece of vellum here foiled with those champagne stars. Although this vellum is quite opaque, you can still see through it, so I thought it would be quite fun to create a window card. So I've got an A2 size white card base here, so that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I'm taking the largest size in the Hero Arts Diamond Infinity die set, and I'm going to use this to create the window. So I'm just going to hold that down on one side with some low tack tape. I'm then going to bring in my T-square ruler here, and I'm just going to make sure that the points on the diamond line up together so that I can cut it straight. Once I'm happy, I can hold the other side down with some low tack tape, and then I can open up the card base and then run that through my die cutting machine. So I can just pop out that window, and then I can just carefully remove that die as well. So I've got the window cut from my card base. I did also cut another panel of white cardstock that's just slightly smaller in size, so that I can pop that on the inside of the card. So that's just going to hide any adhesive or anything like that that I add in there. So I can bring in my vellum piece here, And I'm just going to line it up with the window, and although I can see from the back because my craft mat is dark, it's still easier for me just to bring that from the front so that I can see where the kind of pattern looks the best on the front. So that's the benefit of having that vellum piece be a little bit bigger, that I've got some wiggle room to kind of wiggle it into place where I think the pattern looks the nicest. Then I can just flip that over, and I'm just going to grab a pencil and just draw some marks where I know that I need to cut this vellum down. So just one on either of the points there. And then I am just going to draw a line on the sides as well, just so that I know how far I need to cut. I can then take that to my guillotine, and I've cut that down into a rectangle. And then although I don't really need to cut the corners off, I am just going to cut them off with some scissors. I just didn't want to add too much bulk onto the card. I'm then just removing those pencil lines with an eraser. Again, I don't really need to do this because it's going to get covered up, but I just like to make sure that everything's as neat as possible. And then grabbing my tape runner adhesive, and I'm going around the outside of that diamond shape. I prefer to use kind of like dry adhesive when I'm adhering vellum down. I do find that it warps a little bit if I use wet adhesive, and because I have hot foiled this, I already feel that it's a little bit warped. Once I stick everything down, it's fine and it's not warped at all, but once I took it out of the hot foiling machine, it was a little bit warped. So I just want to make sure that I stick that down really well. I'm then adding some adhesive onto that panel piece, making sure that I add quite a lot of this just to make sure that that sticks down really nicely, and then I can pop that over the top, and that's just going to cover the vellum piece and then also any adhesive that's showing through that vellum as well. So I'm just lining it up here as best as possible. Before I stick that down, I am just going to flip the card over, make sure that it looks nice and clean and neat from the front as well. And then once I'm happy, I can really press that down. So you can see that I've got that nice window there, but obviously I want something on the front as my focal point. So I'm grabbing the Hero Arts number fancy dies. So I've got the number 2, the number 4 and the number 0 here. I'm going to cut those from some Hero Arts gold glitter paper. That's from the Holiday Sparkle collection. I'm adding some Altenew double-sided adhesive sheet onto the back, and then I can cut these numbers from that. I'm using the adhesive sheet for a couple of reasons. One, some of the spaces sort of around the numbers are quite small, and I thought that if I used liquid glue, I might kind of get the glue everywhere, but also it's going to really help to not show the adhesive through the vellum as well. So I've run that through my die cutting machine. I do need to cut the 2 again, so I can just pop those out, and because of the backing on that double-sided adhesive sheet didn't cut through completely, I can just kind of pull those apart, but the actual numbers themselves have cut really nicely. So I have cut them again from some white cardstock, and I've also got that double-sided adhesive sheet onto the back of these as well. I just wanted to add a little bit of dimension, but I didn't want to use foam tape. So I can remove the backing off of that double-sided adhesive sheet, and then that just kind of makes them like a sticker, and they're really easy to adhere one on top of each other. So I'm just going to line those up as best as possible. I am using some tweezers here just to help me out, but I found that it was easier for me just to pick up the number and then kind of move the edges in place. The great thing about this adhesive sheet is that if you press it down, as long as you don't press down really hard, you can actually lift it back up and move it around a little bit as well, which is great. So I can just add that glitter one over the top. And then I just did the same thing for all of the rest of the numbers, and then I can bring in my card base here and I can just lay them down so that I can see where I want them to be placed, just trying to center them as much as possible inside of that diamond shape, but also on the card base itself as well. So I can remove that backing, and then I can stick that down onto the card. And I'm not sure why I started with the 4, but for some reason I wanted to start with the 4. So I'm just going to place it down really lightly here. I'm not pressing it down barely at all. And then I can bring in my T-square ruler and I can just line that up with the bottom of the 4 so that I know where I want to pop the 2 on. And I want to make sure that the gap between the edge of the 2 and the edge of the card base is the same as the edge of the card base and the edge of the 4. And it wasn't quite centered, so I just need to move the 4 over a little bit. So that's why I didn't really want to press down too much at this point. It's just easier for me to move things around. Then I did the 0 above the 4. Again, I can bring in my T-square ruler just to make sure that that's going to be lined up. So then I can pop the 2 next to it. Then once I'm happy with the placement of the numbers, I'm going to grab a scrap piece of paper. This is actually the paper that I used when I was doing the hot foiling, that I used for the shim. And I'm just going to use that to really press down those numbers. So I'm bringing in my bone folder here, just making sure that they're going to be really well stuck down to the card. And then I can just open up the card so that you can see that there's no adhesive showing on the inside of the card. Because I use that double-sided adhesive sheet, it doesn't really read as adhesive because it's completely covering the back of those numbers. If I used liquid glue or something like that, you would definitely see that. So that is the benefit of using that adhesive sheet. I have then heat embossed a sentiment from the Hero Greetings Merry Christmas set. So I stamped that, heat embossed that onto some pitch black cardstock and cut that down into a strip. And I'm going to adhere it onto the card with some foam tape. I want it to kind of overlap the 4 there. So I just need some adhesive on either side so that I can get it to the same height as that number. So this is just some thin foam tape, and I'm using black foam tape just so that it's not so noticeable on the inside. So I can just add a small amount to either side and then a little bit of tape runner adhesive in the center. Bring back my T-square ruler here just so that I can line that up and get that as straight as possible. And then when I open up the card, you can see it a little bit, but I don't think a non-crafter probably would notice that. I think a crafter may notice it, but I don't think a non-crafter would because I used that black foam tape. But I just really love that window in the center. I think it looks really pretty with the foiling on the vellum. I thought I would show you how I would write a personal message in the card. I would get a piece of paper and kind of fold it over to make a little sort of card on the inside, and then write my personal message on the inside, and then that flap over the top would cover the writing so you wouldn't see it through that window. But whatever colour of paper you used, you obviously would see that through the vellum window. So I just used gold there, but it could be any colour, or you could just write a personal message on the back of the card as well. But I really love how that window looks and all of that sparkle and shine. I think it works quite well for a New Year card. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.